Lead Me Winter Training School Madrid 2021. Media Accessibility Training, Sign Language and Subtitling for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. Organised by the Tradaval Research Group and AVLA project at Complutense University Madrid.
The title of the lecture is 5 WH questions and many H of subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing. There are many questions, there are many things we are familiar with, but there are many others we might have never thought of, or we didn't just wonder before, but we find that they're modifying or conditioning considerably what subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, or subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing is these days. So we are going to see, first of all, what subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing is, when it was born, as if we were journalists, who is it addressed to, why is it necessary, and where is it displayed. These are some sort of essential things, basic things we all know more or less, we'll have some answer for. And we come into other ones which we are also familiar with. So how subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing are, how they are produced. We may know how they are produced or as a general overview, but we will see how they are being produced or they were produced till recently, how they are perceived, not just by viewers, but also by professionals just producing those subtitles, how they are studied, and how they've changed, how subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing has changed in the last years. And again, we will, after all that, we'll go back to the real addressees of these subtitles, who it is really addressed, who they are really addressed to. So when we come to subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, we may have like different ideas, pictures in mind. Here you have different logos referring to different subtitles. Which one would you say is the one addressed to the deaf and hard of hearing? You can open your mics.
Okay, I'm sorry. Should we interrupt like that? Like sticking?
Of course, yes, please do. And you can share your screens also. You can not your screens if you want, but also your cameras. That way, it's like as we were all together.
Okay, great. I'm gonna turn on the camera if it's possible. Okay, yeah, it's here. Okay, hi, it's me.
Thank you very much. I feel more accompanied like that.
Yeah, I know it's strange when you're talking to a screen, no? Sometimes it's like, to one of these. Okay, I would say that probably, I don't know, CC, that would be the one for the subtitle. I don't know, I would say that icon for me. I don't know what.
Yeah, well, you're partly right. That is closed captioning. So that's one of the things we will talk about later. Okay, what about the rest? Do you know what the others refer to? The red one?
No idea. No idea. Well, the question.
Ah, okay, the question you know, right? That's it. What about the rest? You know what they refer to?
Probably the one on the left. Sorry, there are people answering.
There you have different icons, just that way I can tell you, just in case you don't know. The general one, okay, we would have is the first one under the title, what is SDH, would be the one referring to subtitles in general, let's say. When we say just subtitles in general is what we have in mind, that interlingual subtitles, not specifically addressed to hard of hearing audiences. That would be the one referring to subtitling in general. The other one is the one we normally use in a European context to refer to products that are produced or released with subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing. The other one, the CC one, refers to closed captioning. And we will come into that later on, when it's like this confrontation, okay, we have between subtitling for the definition or how we refer to this technique. We have subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, and we have closed captioning, okay, in different, used as synonyms, but in different contexts. We have then at the bottom right corner, we have a red symbol that is the one referring to live subtitling, okay, so subtitles which are produced in real time, let's say. And the other one refers to easy to read, not just subtitles, but specific form subtitles. So all those would be referring to subtitles. Some of those maybe addressed only to specific audiences. We will see that throughout this session, okay, because when sometimes we're talking about subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, we have something, a product and an audience in mind, and we may think that in the end, there is not such a given product and no such, maybe it's, yes, there is such a given product, but no such a given audience, okay, because we'll see what the deaf and hard of hearing are, or who may be that deaf and hard of hearing. So we come into definitions. You know that in academia we like definitions a lot, and we have to give names to everything. So we come into what subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing is, or are. So subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing is a modality within audiovisual translation studies aimed at people with hearing impairments, first thing. Just like standard subtitling, it consists of a textual representation of dialogues, first thing we take into account when we produce the subtitles, placed at the bottom of the screen. We'll see whether it's right or not. In addition to dialogue subtitles, SDH takes into account character identification. First, a specific thing, okay, we would consider for this modality of subtitles, assigning colors to different characters or placing text closest to the character speaking, or use labels tags to identify characters. Plus description of sounds and music relevant to the plot and other per-linguistic information. So the sum, okay, the addition of all those elements make up subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing. Well, that's what we have, that's what we had, and we'll see whether this is still valid or not. For sure, we know that is some verbalization of the text that we have in a given product, and we'll see whether some of those parts that are marked, that are highlighted, are still valid or not, okay? So if you consider all those elements of all those icons we show at the beginning, the one referring to, in our case, in a European context, to subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing will be that one, the ear, okay, with that mark. So that would be the one referring to this specific modality of subtitling. Remember that we said that the one of CC would come to be some sort of alternative in a given context, okay, but we will see it later. So then we've seen what subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing are, and we'll come into this conflict, okay, between captioning and subtitling. Captioning would be the form used to refer to this modality of subtitling, okay, in a specific context, normally in American context, but not just in America, okay. In Australia, they also refer to this modality of subtitling as captioning or closed captioning. In some non-European context, they also refer to this modality as captioning. In our case, in Europe, in most European countries, we refer to this modality of subtitling and different ranges of subtitling. Okay, we have subtitling for the deaf. We have subtitling for the deaf as capital D. Okay, and you know what's the difference between lowercase d and capital D? You have talked about in the morning, maybe? Yeah. Okay, so you already know the difference about it. Okay, so now you know subtitling also referred to as subtitling for the hard of hearing, subtitling for the hearing impaired, and subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing, or for people with impairments. We have all these different modalities that they coexist in terms of terminology, and the problem is that this alternance that we have in here, we have it also within the deaf community. And one of the problems that we have is that not all members of the deaf community do, as we would not identify or we would not consider a given profile or a unique profile to talk about all deaf viewers, we would not find a single term to define them all. Okay, but that's something very subjective, and that's something very controversial that somehow represents what we have within the deaf community also. But that's one of the main issues regarding this modality of subtitling. And Joselia Neves already talked about it and has been talking about it for a while now. So she has some interesting publications, okay, that reflect how controversial just terminology can be in terms or in this field specifically. Going back in time, we're going to see one subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing was born. Okay, it's like we always go back in time to a given moment, but it's a little bit vague to specify or clarify specifically a given date. Normally, we go back in time. We said that when silent movies were ended, okay, or somehow ended, access to this, the universal access that deaf people had to get into these products was somehow restricted. So just when this move into music, into sound came into movies, we had to find, or deaf people had to find, some sort of alternatives in order to get access to audiovisual contents. We refer to here, you say Emerson Romero. We refer to Emerson Romero. You might have heard of him, who was a deaf actor who had no problem at all to work within the visual market till silent movies came to an end. Then he had to find alternatives to make audiovisual content accessible for the deaf community. So different strategies or different alternatives were launched in order to grant those access. You might have heard about those small ancestors of subtitles we had in silent movies, okay, like intertextual information that was introduced in the movies. That was some sort of precedent of what we had at the beginning, okay, for subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing. And except for very isolated and very limited examples for many, many years, till the 70s, we didn't get a real, or not a real, just tailored product for deaf audiences. In this case, we refer not only, but the most representative example was a program, The French Chef, in the American television, which was some sort of cooking program on television that was not really intended to grant complete entire access to the deaf community to the program itself, but it just introduced some textual elements on screen that could at least grant some access to those part of the audiences who were restricted, okay, who had restricted access to TV programs. The problem that emerged back then was that these textual elements that were introduced as open-aired on screen disturbed part of the audience. So from a technical point of view, they tried to find alternative solutions so that those texts that were intended just for limited audiences were aired only for those intended audiences. That's how different alternatives were born, both in the UK and in the US, and the European context, to grant those restricted access as closed captions. That's what the Line 21 system was adopted in the US, and then the first alternative solution, the first captions, as they were closed then, they were called them, the first closed captions were released, and decoders were created in order to grant access, okay, to those restricted contents. In the European context, different alternative solutions were also adopted. Okay, we had teletext that both they were born sort of at the time a bit. The American context was a bit more advanced, but then European context started developing also the teletext solutions, and different solutions were adopted in the European context. Later, okay, while it was started being implemented on television, okay, in the 80s, 90s. In the 90s, live representations started to be made accessible through subtitles, okay, for theaters and opera. And then, as you may see there, just from the 30s, okay, in the 20th century till the year 2000, there was a very long period of time, and there were very subtle but relevant evolutions, okay, in the case of subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, or how to grant access to audiences, okay, with hearing impairments. From the year 2000 onwards, or not just 2000, but around 2000 to these days, we've just seen an incredible explosion of solutions that try to grant accessibility to the visual contents for the deaf community, not just to the deaf community, but especially to the deaf community. First, and now it seems like we're talking about our ancestor prehistorical times. Okay, we are talking about DVD or HD contents. Okay, were the first examples that included a considerable amount of accessible information for deaf audiences, not just deaf audiences, because we have also blind audiences who were just also could benefit also for the extra contents that this technology added. But you know that with the possibility of including extra textual contents and audio contents in the DVD support, okay, a lot of information was newly released for deaf and hard of hearing audiences, and was no longer restricted to TV formats, which was the previous scenario. That happened around the year 2000 with the eruption of the internet. Accessibility solutions exploded. So we found that there was much more material that could be made accessible, that could be adapted, okay, to hearing impaired audiences, and as well as a considerable explosion in the presence of audiovisual material, not just restricted to previous scenarios that were just flat screens or large screens, as we had television that was somehow related to DVD, and cinema, what we had also with very limited examples of accessible big screen displays. We have that with the internet, users could have access to much more material, that this material could somehow be totally or partially accessible, and at least they could choose in many cases the sort of material they were having access to. In the last years, and when I mean in the last years, in the last 5 years, we've lived a real explosion of the amount of materials, okay, that are being released for general audiences, and that also happens for audiences with hearing impairments. You're all aware of how the COVID pandemics has exploded the audiovisual market, and how has exploded the AVD profession. Well, it has been such an explosion also for the amount of information the community or audiences have in general, and also in this case audiences with hearing impairments. They have access to much more information, but we'll see what sort of information they are having access to and what sort of accessibility they are having access to these days. So we have seen what subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing are. We have just seen what these subtitles are in terms of definition, and when these subtitles were born, but we really need to know who these subtitles are addressed to. When we talk about hearing impairment, we are normally referring to somehow an impairment, sort of impairment that is somehow blind, that is somehow ignored. Why? Because there are no visual references that can make users be identified as deaf users. We could have, as you see there, a page full of people, and you may not be capable of identifying a deaf viewer, a deaf person, a person with a hearing impairment. And in many cases, we may get that not even some people with hearing impairments may be aware of their own impairments. It's a very subtle impairment, and one of the how to say, handicaps, so that's not the best word, okay, for this impairment is that in many cases people are not aware of these limitations, and not being aware of these limitations is making it impossible to categorize and classify the sort of the population in terms of figures. You'll see now that when we are referring, and we are going to refer to, for example, figures in the Spanish context of people with impairments, we are referring to data back to 2008. No updated data have been released on this impairments. Okay, and it's very difficult to get updated information on this context. So if I ask who is the average deaf viewer for you, who would be thinking of? In terms of age, in terms of profile, in terms of what comes to your mind when you are thinking of a deaf person?
What comes to my mind is older people.
Older people, okay. Communicating in a given language or not? Not specifically.
No, in any given language, I think.
Okay, so just when we are normally, that's I have to say that you wouldn't be the average people thinking of deaf and hard of hearing people. The standard person, okay, not having direct contact to audiovisual accessibility, let's say, and I have it for my experience with my students here at university, then I normally think of people communicating in sign language. And that's not the most, maybe it would be the most representative example of a person with hearing impairment, but not the most representative in terms of figures. What we see here, what I told you is that we're referring to data back to 2008 and in Spanish context, but is somehow representative of what happens all across in many of the countries. Normally, the most representative and the biggest amount of people, okay, with hearing impairments is just from 65 years old onwards. Okay, so why? Those viewers or those people are people who have just acquired impairments. Okay, they have lost their hearing capacities, or they are losing their hearing capacities in time, and these are the most representative group in terms of figures. When I tell you about percentages, we have to say that back then I cannot give you a given figure, okay, with decimals or stuff, because the figures are so vague, so that they speak about 1 million people with hearing impairments. And they don't give exact figure, is around 1 million around 1 million users. Just considering that at that moment back in time, there were like 45 million people in Spain. You can just consider, okay, see what the relationship is in this case. So we see that the most representative group would be 65 years old onwards, okay, and the lesser represented groups are the youngest groups, okay, and those would be the least considered, if you want to say. When said someone, I don't know who was just answering before, said, okay, I'm thinking of just the elderly, let's say. Well, apart from that, we would have to talk about the hearing profile of those users. We have already thought about the elderly. We said they are the most representative group in terms of number of people affected. We would have to consider also whether they are monaural, bioral, orally affected. That's it. They only have a hearing impairment in one of their ears or in both ears. Whether they are using EDs or they don't use EDs. And in terms of the onset, that is specifically important also. What we saw before, it could be an acquired impairment. So someone losing their hearing capacities along their life, or someone that might have been affected by an accident, that they have been affected by an illness. Okay, so different problems. This also has to do with the moment. Okay, this onset has to do also with the moment where language has been acquired, because it would also affect on the way these people will communicate also in the future. Okay, depending on the moment where this impairment has been acquired, will mark not only whether this person will be able to communicate in sign language or will be communicating will not be communicating, but will acquire oral language also in order to communicate. And it's just not, we are not just referring to the language they are communicating, but the culture that is behind that language also. So that is a much more complicated structure. So apart from the onset, like the degree or the hearing profile is also marked by how profound that impairment is. But depending on how profound impairment is, some hearing remains will help viewers, will help people develop develop oral capacities or not, because they will have some hearing remains that will help them mimic, okay, or imitate what their oral capacities are. So apart from that, the economic profile would also affect whether people born in a given context may have access to specific funding or not, or to specific educational resources or not. So all those elements are elements that make us differentiate or make hearing impairment audiences or hearing impairment communities differentiate, okay, from each other. So going back, now we know that we have a very heterogeneous group, that it's not just that they are heterogeneous, they consider themselves heterogeneous too, and they are aware that not a given solution is going to be satisfactory for all of them. But we have to know why subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing are necessary, and whether what is being given to a given audience at a given time, okay, as a solution or a subtitle for the deaf and hard of hearing solution is the most satisfactory example of accessibility. So now I'm going to stop sharing a moment, and I want to propose something. I want to share with you an example, an exercise. Okay, I don't know whether you are familiar with French or not. Don't worry. Okay, I'll give you a script, and I'm giving you a bit of a film, of a French film. We have a double script, both in English and in French, so that you can follow, and it's a very brief scene. Okay, I want to propose you to subtitle it for the deaf. We haven't seen anything so far, but you are aware, you know that we have to give some extra information to people with hearing impairments. We are seeing what subtitling is. We haven't just placed this subtitling in a given context. I don't know whether all of you come from a humanities background, from translation studies, philology, linguistics, all these profiles. Okay, we are not the only ones. studying subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing and audiovisual accessibility. But we think that in our case, we are much aware that we need to, or we are studying and working to make people communicate, and that's what we have to do. So I think that we have to consider, and that's something that we always have to keep in mind, is that we have to consider any form of audiovisual accessibility as a tool to grant access to the information we do have. So sometimes we are given a product and we say, you know, that normally when we are working with audiovisual accessibility, depending on the context, and for example, in the Spanish context, we are quite marked at the fact that subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing tend to be intralingual, so that both hearing and hard of hearing communities can share the same elements. But in contexts, in subtitling context, where this is not the case, where they are not so marked by dubbing, okay, this interlingual subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing is absolutely natural, okay? So in this case, I'm making you work with this interlingual context, okay? And I'm giving you something so that you have to make it accessible, both from the point of view of a translator and from the point of view of a professional of accessibility, yeah? So I don't know how to make it. Just Juanpa, you can tell me. Should I just share my screen? Should I share the video? How do you? I can share the template I have just prepared.
You want to show two things: the video.
I've got the template so that in case they need it, okay, so that they can share it. I don't know whether they can have access to that or.
Well, we could share both things, but probably you could be sharing something and I could be sharing the other part. I don't know.
I can share. They don't really need the text that much. Okay, I can share the video. Okay, if you want,
yeah.
And that way, I hope you can hear it without problem. It's a very brief scene. I don't know whether you know Asterix Obelix, Missioncleopatra. Okay, it's a brief scene from that. And now you can.
Devant la violence de cette scène, nous préférons vous montrer ce document consacré à la langouste.
Contrairement à une idée largement répandue, la langouste se nourrit exclusivement de fruits de mer. Ce qui ne l'empêche pas de rester très humaine.
Il est rentré là. Il est fixe, attaque.
Okay, that's it. Brief one, I promised. Okay.
But the dog is like my dog.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah.
So you can tell him attack also. Okay, I told you it was in French. Okay, I'm sorry, but I think this is quite a representative one. Okay, think of a person with hearing impairment having no access to the text as it is. Okay, first of all, we have like as if it were a documentary, we have some sort of voiceover. Okay, so we have information that's not, they cannot lip read or infer from a screen, and suddenly they get a lobster on a screen, and they may not understand what's going on. Okay, that on the one hand. And just by the end of that, okay, so what about the scene of the dog, of Juanpa's dog over there running? Okay, imagine you have to provide some extra information. We have there the dog running, but there's something going on with the music. Does it ring a bell? Does it just maybe not remind you of anything because you're too young and I feel too old, but there is information missing there.
Lucia raised her hand. So maybe
yes, Lucia.
Hi. Dealing with that scene, I would just like try to explain the kind of music, because it's an intertextual element that it's more important than what's happening in scene. And if they are hard of hearing, they can see what is happening, but they miss what they are telling. So it would be better for me to maybe describe the music, maybe not below, but up, or in a different way of the dialogues, just to make to highlight the difference of that's dialogue, that's background information, or that's more information. And the same with the documentary cut. I would just explain the introduction or give some clues, not explaining the whole, because the important thing is that the audience understand or get this hint or this change in the visual effect. So I would try to describe the sense, but without completely telling. I don't know if I'm explaining myself.
Yeah, absolutely. We could adopt two different strategies, because the sort of information and the problems that this clip is raising are totally different. In the first case, even if you have no access to the French language, I can tell you, okay, Obelix is or just a voiceover is telling us, okay, given the violence of this scene, we are going to show a documentary on lobsters. So we have the context information. So even if we don't get any more information at all, we already know what's going on, just as the rest of the audience, if we give that bit of information before. But what happens, okay, with the music at the end? There is something different going on, okay? There is a turn in the sound, a turn in the music, and you were saying, and I want to know whether you have that extra information. What does it refer to? That extra sound, that extra music that is just presented there, what does it just refer to?
I don't really get the origin of it, but I guess it's from some kind of dramatic scene from a particular movie or series of a very well-known scene. I don't know, I don't recognize it, but it sounds to me something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a feeling. I'm not sure.
Okay, Juanpe, I don't want to call you oldie, but you are almost as oldie as I am. Have you got that in mind?
I've got it, but I can't remember the name.
I show you now. Think that this is already an old film. Okay, so that references, as I told you, you are too young. Okay, and you see, Juanpe and me, we are oldies, and we are even lost in this case. So when we are translating something, that has to be translated in a given context. Okay, so out of that context, everything changes. We should update it and we should rephrase it somehow. So here, the additional information that is missing is this.
Sauvegarder les qualités de l'alimentation du chien, c'est le métier de Royal Canin. Royal Canin, spécialiste de l'aliment complet.
Okay, so that was a bit of information that was missing. So here the reference was just to this commercial, and of course the size of the dog has nothing to do. Okay, but part of the humor present in sin is in there. So this is complicated to convey, but this is something we also have to deal with. If normally we wouldn't have to deal with that in any other form of audiovisual translation, in audiovisual accessibility, in this case in subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing, sometimes we ignore that this also exists and we have to deal with this. Just because it is interlingual, we think, okay, the text, in our case, the text is not going to be a problem. But the way to verbalize, to put into words, to put down in words, write down in words, the sound is the most difficult thing of all. Okay, so we're moving on. This was just example. I will just give you another one later on. Okay, just also of this film, and you don't need French, I promise, okay? But I just wanted to show you examples of that could ring a bell on how there is yes, sure, we could add something like Royal Canon in the sound in the text we have as far as the rest understands what it refers to. Because if we all know what that is, that's perfect. But if, for example, if I had told you this referred to Royal Canon, would you have known? No. Okay. So what your colleague was telling before, some sort of description should have helped otherwise. But maybe sometimes what we said is like, you know, translation defects. So that's the best thing you can do without being perfect. Okay, so we may have to assume that there would be part of the information that could be missing, but we would have to decide which part of that information we want to sacrifice, if you want. Okay, yeah, that's it. Okay, it doesn't have to be a spoon feeding. You shouldn't provide more information that a hearing person would have. For example, in this case, you would be as lost as a hard of hearing audience because you didn't have the reference in time or in mind. Okay, so if you provide that information, you would be telling the hard of hearing viewer where it comes from. But if that person doesn't know this commercial of Royal Canon, okay, it's like any extra information that would be useless. Okay, that's it. So providing that information or explaining whether it is like slow classical music, trying to explain that the situation has been just slowed down, that we are already seeing that, but that there is a twist, okay, that change in the music. I'm trying to see. Yeah, a love story soundtrack. I could be, I mean, it would be just, you have to compensate. You have to introduce that humor. How do you do that? It has to make sense these days. Again, I tell you, this was just, this film is like 2002, something like that. So it made sense back then. If we were just subtitling this these days, we couldn't just refer to the same references because that would be outdated. Yeah. So we move on. You want to move on? We will go back to another controversial example later on, okay? And I'm sure you are just, you'll be as lost as with this one, yeah? Okay, so we move on, we continue. So we're saying, where subtitles, what, when they were born, who they are addressed to, and how they are referred to, and where are they displayed? Okay, like traditionally we said at the beginning there was only cinema, then there was television, then DVD, then the internet, then everywhere. Okay, so when we say everywhere is because we have screens everywhere. So we can have all these subtitles in a I wouldn't say unlimited, but sort of unlimited number of formats. Okay, in any sort of screen, from just what our smartphones to ordinary televisions or big scenarios as we have there with subtitles that they are also another form of audiovisual accessibility in terms of subtitling in just in the means of transport, in the most traditional forms of telephones, okay, for people with hearing impairments. So these screens have gone on. So they are displayed. Not just display modes are not the most notorious way these days about this subtitling form, but how these are released is one of the most striking things, especially in the last years. So about the layout, how they look like. If I had asked you before now, okay, I asked you before which was the profile hearing impaired person. If I ask you about the profile subtitle for the deaf and hard of hearing, what would come to your mind? Just all white, color subtitles, subtitles at the bottom, teletext format like captions, capital letters? What would come to your mind? A bit of everything? Well, that would be a bit of everything. Why? Because there are many different traditions that have been evolving just as technology has. So, for example, what we said before, that when the first decoders were born, different technologies were produced in the American context and European context. So, for example, the American context was limited to line 21, so that implied that they were forced to using capitalized subtitles. So all the formats, all the fonts used were capital fonts. And that didn't happen in the European context with the teletext that we had for many years. We had those formats that were teletext fonts that we couldn't customize. That has made traditions evolve equally. Apart from that capitalization of those subtitles, for example, in the American context, that technology was also restrictive in terms of the colors used, so that white was used only for all subtitles, so that, for example, character identification was restricted, okay, or was tailored, taking this into account. What didn't happen, for example, in the European context, where colors were used, or at least some colors were used, and then character identification was also marked by this choice, okay? So these different technological restrictions were somehow limiting or conditioning the evolution of these subtitles. And but not only that, okay, these technological evolutions that have been affected different elements in the evolution of subtitles are marking not just those elements that affect the layout, okay, or the visuals of subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, but also, for example, something so neutral as would be the format where subtitles, or how subtitles are recorded, for example, or are saved, and whether they are produced in a given, or whether they were produced in a given manner or not. Okay, ordinary first subtitles, or traditionally for the first subtitles, were not produced with computers, as we are seeing these days. Okay, and they were produced with traditional keyboards. So that implies that, for example, subtitles were left justified, and that has conditioned given traditions in some countries, for example, in terms of justification for those subtitles. So these different aspects that are somehow conditioning traditions are conditioning the products viewers are traditionally exposed to, are marking also preferences for a given sort of alternative. For example, we said that in the case of Spain, we're a dubbing country, and if I ask now, I ask you whether you prefer dubbing over subtitling, what would you tell me? I think that in most cases, most of you would say subtitling, because we are much more, or we've traditionally been much more exposed to subtitling because we want to appreciate, okay, original voices and acting. I don't know whether it's the case or not, but normally linguists and film experts were the only ones who went traditionally for subtitled versions, whereas the rest of the community, the rest of the population would go for dubbed versions. That preference, or that differentiation between dubbing and subtitling populations, is something similar to what happens with the different traditions people are exposed to, are familiar with in terms of subtitling. Okay, not just subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, but subtitles in general. If that happens for subtitles in general and for subtitling traditions, okay, the layout, how subtitles are presented, that also happens for subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing. So, for example, we know, well, you know because most of you or many of you are already experts in subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing. What is the traditional basic layout of subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, for example, in the case of Spain? How's the layout? Or the UK? Are there monochrome subtitles? Are they, I told you before, are there capital subtitles or lowercase subtitles? 3-liners, 2-liners? How are they? 2-liners, they are 2-liners normally, and normally we use colors to identify speakers. Okay, that's in Spanish context. Well, not so far away, okay, just in France, for example, they also use colors, but they don't use colors to identify speakers. Colors are used to identify different sources of information or acoustic information, sound information. So one color would be used to refer to foreign voices, a different color would be used to refer to music, a different color would be used to refer to sounds. So they also have color coding, but their color coding is totally different to what the rest are traditionally doing, because the French are the only ones using that technique. So what happens? We would say, wow, as Obelix, they are nuts, okay, they are mad. No, that's what they have and that's what they like. As it happens with us on dubbing, that's what happens with them on their color coding. Okay, so people have been exposed to this tradition and they are already familiar with that, and that's what they like. Okay, so that's the same, that's exactly what happens with us. So we saw that we have, we've seen that like the technological evolution has marked somehow what we have these days in terms of the appearance of subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, but also now we have the restrictions or impositions of technology and LSPs or streaming platforms. Okay, do you normally use? You know, these days we've been talking much about Netflix and the Squid Game and not much related, not much related to subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, but a tiny bit. Okay, so I don't know whether you normally, I presume, and I assume you do, you normally consume those Netflix products. I don't know whether with or without subtitles. Normally have a look at it with subtitles. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, you're okay. You assume. Okay. Okay. So how is it? You know that they have their open style guide so that we can all know what they're doing, and we have as with respect to subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, it would be easy to say, okay, that's how it should be done, and we should all adopt the same style guides and the same strategies, but it doesn't happen like that. Okay. So normally, as it happens, or that's what traditionally happened back in time, okay, deaf viewers or hard of hearing impaired viewers would just come in front of their screens and would say, okay, I'm going to watch this. I know subtitles will be like this. Okay, now, so they are just switching from one TV channel to a different one, or they are just watching a DVD, or they are having access now to a streamed content. The subtitles they are getting are totally different. I asked you, I don't know whether you normally have a look at or get subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, for example, in Netflix. Okay, they are totally different. If we are talking about, for example, the number of characters per line in for the ordinary TV platforms or for DVD, how many characters would you say they're coming in line? I know you tell you, and if they're your students, they should know. Juanpe, you tell them.
Yeah, they should.
How many characters per line would we have, for example, as for, I don't know, maybe DVD, which is a bit more different. Okay, we would say that traditionally we were talking about 37, 40 characters per line, okay? And we were talking about subtitling speeds that were somehow between around 17 characters per line normally, okay? And that's what Netflix says, okay, more or less 40. Well, they go up to 42. That is a bit more cinema than ordinary subtitles addressed for television. but they are just working on 70 characters per line. That's a bit faster than should be, for example, but for cinema, but that works. Well, if that's what normally we would do, for example, for ordinary subtitling. We do not have standards just imposing how subtitles should be at general in, for example, all across Spain. We do have the national standard in case of Spain telling us how things should be done, okay? But that's not imposing, so it's like, okay, I know how it should be done, but I can just adopt this standard or not. Well, BBC has their own standards, okay, as it happens with many other TV channels, but there is not a single guideline just that works or that's adopted just across the different countries. So each country would just work on the different traditions and technological and just adapting to the different technological evolutions. But then Netflix came, and what they've done is they've tried to somehow adopt a standard version for all contexts. Okay, so in the case of subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, what we have is, okay, we are working with 42 characters per line, which is much longer than would be, for example, according to the Spanish standard. And we know we should subtitle like 70 characters per line, but okay, we are going to push it a tiny bit. So we're going up to 20 characters per line. Per second, sorry. So 20 characters per second is even faster than it would be, okay, for ordinary, for hearing audiences. Okay, that is much closer to what it was, for example, the previous Spanish standard that was working with up to 19 characters per second. Yeah, so they are just popping up this subtitling speeds, okay, for hard of hearing audiences. Apart from that, they say, okay, but we are not working with colors. Everything is going to be white. Okay, so once again, they are saying, okay, we are adopting like a unique style guide that is trying to adapt to all contexts, considering the differences in all these contexts. Well, we would say, okay, they are doing something totally different, just as the French are, okay, but we'll see whether audiences are happy with these changes or not. What would you think? What do you think deaf audiences, hearing impaired audiences, think about this imposing standards, so different standards? Do you think they feel happy with them, or say, I don't like this?
Angela, yes, go ahead.
Hi. Is it possible that the consumers of Netflix subtitles are totally different from the consumers of the television subtitles? So probably, no, they have a different opinion, because I don't think they are the same age as you told us before, no? Are the elderly watching Netflix or not?
That's it. That's the key. Okay, that's the key on the one hand, and on the other hand, we do have that what deaf audiences think. Okay, say this is better than nothing. Okay, so they are always afraid of not having access to this information. So if this implies that by getting this, at least they are being granted some access, even if that's not the best, to this content, they prefer that to nothing at all. Okay. So apart from that, I don't know whether you have had it. I got it just in the social media, something that was published yesterday or the day before from the BBC, saying that the profile of people having access or people accessing subtitles was totally different, and it was younger audiences, the one who went for just as in a big number for reading subtitles. That's what happens here also. We said that the biggest community with hearing impairment in our case was people over 65. Those are not those people over 65 that in most cases that have an acquired hearing impairment. So they are not familiar with impairment. They are not familiar with the sort of access they are having to this contents in a different format. And as Angela was saying, they are not used to reading subtitles because they were not needing them before. So the profile is totally different. Okay, and that's why it's like saying, okay, it's not that we are going to ignore a huge number of users who are older and we think they are not that familiar with these products, but maybe we can also train or get our users being used to specific formats so that they will become familiar to this, and that would come to be some sort of standard across countries. That in the end, that's simplifying for them because they are just standardizing their practices, and they are imposing their practices across the different countries. We'll see whether it works or not, or they'll have to adapt somehow, because what we are having is that platforms, these days they are growing. Okay, they were already growing right from the pandemic onwards. They have grown exponentially. So consumption now is much more balanced, okay, towards streaming. And these streamed contents, they are not being made accessible as previously other contents were. Okay, so we'll see that whether we have some problems there, or this will become to be a solution. Okay, this sort of new date in our calendar to mark. Okay, so we continue. I can.
May I ask you something?
Yeah, sure.
I was wondering why the rest of the countries, or why Spain is different in that case, are not using the color thing. I think it is something very useful for, at least for end users in Spain, to have that distinction between different colors, or the 4 main colors, and then the rest of the subtitles in white. Why is it not used? I mean, it's simply a curiosity. I don't know if there's that.
In America in general, okay, the ones who are trained or are traditionally using closed captioning is like tradition. Okay, we are familiar. Generally, we are familiar to dubbing, and we are not that familiar with subtitling, so that people normally would prefer dubbing. Okay, in their case, technology was limited to white, so they had to look for alternatives in character identification. That's why they used labels or tags to identify speakers, or speaker positioning. So that they could identify speakers like that. They have got used to that system, and they prefer it over color coding. And in the case, for example, of France, they are familiar to this, and they don't like the other system. They don't want colors to identify speakers. In their case, all speakers are identified white, and they use tags. It's true that we are so conditioned by this color coding that we think it is absolutely essential. But as far as speakers are correctly identified, that may not be necessary. So you may get, for example, in a given film, where you may have to use, if you were using tags, you may have to use just 40, 50 tags, no more, to identify, make difference between speakers, because normally that's the coincidence of speakers on a screen. It does not happen that often, because from a technical point of view, that was not allowed before. So in many cases, subtitles are trained to say, okay, different speakers and different subtitles. So now they can do it, and technically it can be done, but we are somehow conditioned also. So, but I like it also. I think that colors are great. Okay, in our case, they could be tricky where there is some sort of ambiguity or things like this. Okay, but I think that is very, very, very easy or user-friendly, okay, for users to adopt. But I don't know. Sometimes they say, okay, but think that there are many deaf people who have some sort of just visual impairment, okay, on top of their hearing impairment, and that could be restrictive. So sometimes they have proposed to use a combination of both color coding and tags, but that would be extremely redundant, okay? And for companies like service providers, for the standard subtitler, it takes standard subtitler longer to add color coding and everything. So the more simple it is, the easier it would be for them. But for the moment, we respect that. So for the moment, we are producing with colors. Yeah. But we have to know that it is tendency, and it's like what we've been trained to. Okay. But you can interrupt as much as you want. Yeah. I prefer it like this. So can you see again my screen? Oh.
There is one more question in the chat, Vero.
Yeah, tell me.
About the maximum number of characters per line.
Then yes, and it is, and there are some things we are using because we've been conditioned by previous technologies. So the 37 characters per line was, you know, this flat, we now have flat screens, and whenever we think about these huge screens with a huge pack, okay, it's like, that seems like the Holocene or things like this, yeah? Right. And they had a very comped screen, okay, so it was a bit circular like that. So you know that all these people that were normally presented at the edges of the screen, they tended to be fat or distorted somehow, yeah, you know? So as that was like the safe space, so they tended to avoid these spaces for subtitles so that characters were not distorted. Yeah, so that these 37 characters were the number of M, okay, which was the biggest character that could fit on the screen. Now we have flat screens, so that problem does no longer exist, but we tend to use the same thing. And it's the same thing. I don't know whether you have heard about whether to use full stop or comma at the end of a subtitle. Okay, that's the same tendency. They tried to avoid commas because they could be mixed up or think it was a stop because of the resolution of the screens. And the same thing with using sans serif fonts, the same thing. It was a matter of resolution. We no longer have the same resolutions, but we have the same tendencies. So it's like we are still using what was done, okay, like 30 years ago, and we have like much more than technologies. But yeah, I think I just replied. Okay, I answered that. But in any case, you just stop me. You ask me, because when I have my screen, when I'm sharing my screen, I cannot see the chat. So it's, don't think I don't want to answer. Okay, it's that I didn't see the question. Yeah,
I'll let you know. Don't worry.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm trying to go on, to move on, but I don't know what happens with my screen.
It is visible.
Oh, yeah, but I couldn't just go ahead. So we are saying, okay, we know what it is, we know how it is. Let's see how it is produced. So you all know what subtitles are. In many cases, yes, Juanpe has been your teacher, so you might have been trained so far. So how is it produced? Basically, or generally, there has to be a keyboard involved. Yeah. So, and then on top of the keyboard, we have a subtitler. How the subtitler works, the keyboard or uses the keyboard, is a different thing. So we do have, when I'm saying keyboard, like the keyboard or keyboards, okay? You know that traditionally we're all using a standard keyboard, okay, in order to introduce and produce subtitles, either for deaf and hard of hearing or standard subtitles, okay? But I don't know whether you've heard about stenotypists, yes? Stenography, have you heard about it? It's like an abbreviated keyboard, a very weird keyboard where there is a key combination in order to take in a verbatim way all the content of a given speech. Okay, it is not only used in subtitling, but it's just in any other context, okay, for live representations, and somehow something similar. For example, I'm sure you have seen those American films where there is a typist, okay, just in front of the judge taking notes of absolutely everything, something similar. These stenotypists, okay, this system, this technology used to produce subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing was specifically used to produce these subtitles in live events, so that they could take note, or they could convey absolutely all the textual component. The problem with this is that these professionals needed a 2-year training, and then came re-speaking. And you know how much or how long it takes to train a re-speaker. Okay, as long as you can train the re-speaker, you can also train the tool, okay, the dragon, if you want. That is much faster. And from a technological point of view, it is more simple. So I'm not saying that re-speaking has replaced the syntypists, but is on the way of replacing it. Okay, replacing this practice, but it still exists, and it is still been present, and it is very important in some countries, for example, like Italy, where now, or before re-speaking, syntypist was quite strong. In all those cases, we are having a keyboard and we are having a human involved. Okay, well, in case of re-speaking, the use or not use of that keyboard is depending on how it is adapted. But then we have automatic systems. And as it happens with everything that comes to be automatic in translation, well, the reality is there, it exists, okay, but we'll see how it works. Everything could turn to be automatic, but quality is also some sort of automatic these days, okay? So, so far we can be, we shouldn't panic, let's say, but we have to be aware, or we have to be realistic, okay? We have to know that it is something that is there, and we can integrate it, or we will see whether we can integrate it in our practice, okay, in order to produce subtitles also for the deaf and hard of hearing. So we have to not be afraid, but realize they're there and see how we can collaborate in the future. Okay, I don't know what happens. Wow. So on the way of perception, talking about perception, we have to see whether or how subtitles are perceived, not just by the audiences, but also by professionals and researchers. When it comes to audiences, they are very much aware of how subtitles should be. They sometimes know how subtitles are produced, and they are absolutely aware of how subtitles should be. For example, in the case of subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, in the case of Spain, they are all aware of the standard, not the standard itself, but the representation of the standard. So that's what visually they are familiar with, for example, what has been presented, what has been displayed on television. From a professional point of view, from a practical point of view, in many cases, they do not know how these subtitles are produced, and they are not aware of the restrictions subtitles do have to face when they are producing subtitles. And that's one of the most important elements. For example, the main issue for them is to be provided as many subtitles as possible. They want all products to be subtitled, and we have that no 100% of production is being made accessible these days. I'm talking about subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, and I'm saying that this form of accessibility is much more common than any other description, sign language, for example. But in not even the case of subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, we have 100% production being made accessible. So they want, first of all, they want as much as possible. Then they want subtitles to identify speakers. Okay, and when they talk about identifying speakers, they are normally thinking of color coding. That's what they are familiar with. Okay, and they want, and I would say that even before color coding, they want verbatim subtitles. Most of you, if not all of you, know how difficult it is to provide verbatim subtitles. We know when we are talking about these restrictions, we do have characters per line, subtitling speed. We know that we have to condense, we have to omit many things, and we know that we have to do it, but because from a technical point of view, otherwise we wouldn't have time to read it all. In the case of deaf audiences, they think that it's they want to be the ones deciding which part of the information they can skip, okay, as if they were provided everything they would be able to choose. They wouldn't, but they don't really know. So whenever something is not present on subtitles, they think that something has been interpreted somehow or has been omitted intentionally somehow. So that's one of the main fights between subtitlers and viewers in this case, deaf viewers in this case, because although they know how they should be, they don't know why it has been done. What they don't know why things are not presented exactly the same thing. They think the information has been censored somehow, and they are not thinking of the technical restrictions subtitlers have to face. From a technical point of view, what we have is that we know how we have to present information. We know how things have to be done, but in many cases we don't know how we came to these solutions. So we know subtitles are presented at the bottom of the screen, but and that they have to be present on a screen for 6 seconds or 7 to the limit sometimes, or no less than 1 second, or a tiny bit less, maybe sometime. Okay, but we've been told so. In many cases, we didn't even wonder why. So there's there's research going on in order to decipher these things that have been done for many years, and we don't know whether they are still valid or not. We're still talking about this 6-second rule and the 1-second rule and the number of characters per line, but we're seeing that maybe people are not reading at the same pace now these days, so maybe some things could be changed. So how are we coming to study how subtitles are perceived or how viewers are processing subtitles? Well, one of the technologies, or the main technology we normally use to analyze or see how people are processing subtitles is eye tracking. I don't know whether you're familiar with what eye tracking is, or you could get something as uncomfortable as the man there with that head mounting structure, or you could get something so easy, or as easy as the screen you have there in the middle, which is just a flat screen. You could just see anything there and get access just totally freely without being affected by any external element. Sometimes when we are studying, or we want to know how people process information. The problem we are having is that when we ask viewers how they are processing information, they may be telling us something they may not even be aware of. Okay, so we may ask, for example, viewers, did you see the music information that was represented at the top right corner of the screen? And they may tell us yes. And if we see, okay, the eye tracking pattern, we may see that they even didn't go to see that information that was displayed at the top right screen. Okay, so they may not even be aware of some things, because what these eye trackers do is they follow the eyesight and they show where the eye stops in the reading process. So that way we can know how subtitles are processed, how people tend to read, what they come to read first or next. Okay, so this has been one of the technologies that has been used intensively in the last years, not just only for subtitling or subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing, but in many other fields in translation also. Apart from eye tracking, which is the most standard one, or just one of the most important ones, we do have electroencephalograms, okay? That is to decipher, okay, or to see trying to see which parts of the brain are used in order to process or which parts are activated to process some bits of information. As you can see, although not very uncomfortable, this is not so comfortable. So as, for example, as in standard eye tracker, where you can sit and relax and just enjoy your screen. Here you have a head mounted structure, a helmet in this case, with some sensors, okay, that may be altering somehow an ordinary viewing, for example. And if you are a bit concerned about what you're just been wearing, okay, data could be altered somehow. Well, in this case, data from the eye tracker and this EGG, okay, could be combined in order to get very in-deep information, very profound information. For example, in the example, the representation, you have the top right corner. Okay, here you have a combination of an eye tracker. It is standalone tracker, okay, but it's a more simple one, not just the screen itself, apart from an EGG more simple helmet, the one that the lady is wearing. Okay, so the combination of all those data would provide very detailed information of how the viewer is processing information. In this case, no subtitle reading, but it could be subtitle reading in different platforms. Okay, could be subtitle reading, for example, in a smartphone or in a laptop, or okay, in any other format. And the last one would be MRA. Okay. In this case, as you can imagine, okay, it's very intrusive, okay, so that is very residual example of research that is not yet being conducted in the case of subtitling. It is in other cases, in the case of accessibility to audiovisuals, okay, but not yet in the case of audiovisual translation. Okay, imagine that you're entered there, you could not enter, for example, with subtitling, with a device introducing subtitling. So it is not something yet introduced in the case of subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, but okay, I wouldn't say it wouldn't be introduced later on. Okay, and these are like the complicated examples or technologies to analyze and study subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing. But we have to go back to what is being done and what was being done in the past and what is still being done. That is interviews and product compilation. We compile lots of hours of products to analyze the production, and we compile lots of hours of interviews with viewers, with deaf audiences in this case, to know about their preferences, their understanding. Okay, so the basic study is not conducted normally with the technologies we've seen so far. So the basic technology is based on working with viewers. So they are the ones who can provide the closest and the most detailed information. The other ones must always be combined, okay, with the basic ones to tell you interviews normally, like databases based on corpora built with information from the products, okay. So it's like traditional systems and traditional methodologies just implemented with new technologies that are also present and are being used in other fields. So we've seen so far how subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing has changed, but we have to be aware also how it's been changing. We say that all the turns in technology are changing, but all the changes in preferences in audiences are making these subtitles change also. So then we've seen who are subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, who is subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing addressed to? Do you still think it is addressed to deaf and hard of hearing audiences, or are we all deaf and hard of hearing in this case? I'm going to show you something. Okay, you remember at the very beginning we were saying that they were aimed at people with hearing impairments, these subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, and we were explained how these subtitles were displayed at the bottom of the screen, that they were including these bits of information. Okay, but if we go to the Libro Blanco de la Accesibilidad, that it was really like the White Book on Accessibility is some sort of, not say Bible, but would say a standard guide on accessibility that was released in Spain in 2006. They say that we all encounter barriers. So in a given moment, we all could have problems to get to have access to a given audiovisual product. Imagine I was just showing some pictures of people at the gym, people in a pub, watching television. Normally, in many cases, in many of those contexts, you see that subtitles are on, okay? And it's not just standard subtitles or subtitles for deaf and hard of hearing audiences. Why? Because in a given moment, we all have the need of having access or of accessing those products and have accessing the information that is being displayed in these products, okay, in those products. And we may not have access to the soundtrack. That could be because we are in a given moment, in a given place where we don't have access to that content, but that could be because in a given moment we are having some restrictions, okay, some physical restrictions or psychological restrictions to have access to that information. Imagine you have to undergo surgery, you have some sort of illness that is just limiting somehow your capacities in a given moment. In that time, at that moment, you will have the need or having access also to these contents. So in a given moment, we all could have access, or we all would need access to those products, yes? So this was the first bit.
There's some comments. I didn't want to interrupt you, but there's some comments.
I know. I'm seeing them now.
in the chat, Gabriel, for example, giving the situation in Italy, how the subtitles are presented in Italy, and also Valerie also talking about the situation in France as well.
Yeah, in Italy, they have many, as it happens in Spain. Okay, we will talk about the traditional subtitling. We are still doing what has been traditionally been done for the last 30 years, 20 years. Okay, and we're still doing so. And then we have something that is totally different. For example, in these Netflix platforms and HBO platforms and Amazon platforms. Well, I'm talking about Netflix mainly, but because in the other ones, in many cases, they are not specifically providing accessibility as such. They are providing subtitles, and in many cases deaf audiences do not complain about what they are being provided. Okay, so they are happy because they are having access somehow to something. Okay, once they have access, they may start complaining on the quality what they are having access to, but for the moment they are happy because they are having access, as it happened with the COVID pandemics. Okay, you know, all these teaching learning platforms, as it happens with Teams. Okay, they didn't think on accessibility back then. Okay, and in a limited number of months or weeks, okay, they have to change it all in order to provide some sort of solution, because people with the impairments were having limitations, okay, to use these tools that were the only ones we could use back then. Okay, so this moves quite quick. It's taken like 60 years, 70 years to have some sort of accessibility to television, and now everything is going quite fast. So we'll see what it turns. This is already old-fashioned tomorrow. Okay.
Probably, yeah.
Do you want to have another example, or just?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have it ready. Okay, it's similar to what I showed before. I'm sharing my screen again. Again, the same film. Okay, a different clip. Okay, quite brief again. I'm not providing background. You already know it's Asterix Obelix. Okay, but I'm not telling you anything about it. Yeah. And I want this. I would be interested in you providing subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing. I'm not interested in the text. I'm interested in the things or the bits of information you should provide extra info on, okay, for deaf audiences. Yeah. Okay, so I show you the clip.
Quelqu'un a allumé une torche?
Non, enfin, moi j'ai la boîte d'amulettes de numéro bis, mais ça sert à rien.
Ça me fait de la peine pour numéro bis.
Moi, ça me fait de la peine pour mon pauvre Idéfix. Pas vrai, Idéfix?
Idéfix?
Bah oui, quoi, Idéfix. Vous allez pas encore me reprocher de l'avoir amené? Il est venu tout seul.
Non, mais justement, il nous a retrouvés grâce à son flair. Il peut donc retrouver son chemin et nous aider à sortir d'ici.
Mais c'est vrai, ça. Idéfix, écoute bien. Si tu nous aides à sortir d'ici, tu auras une farandole d'os.
Oh oui, ça c'est bien, Idéfix.
Ah, je te demande pardon, Obélix, tu as vraiment eu raison de l'emmener.
Des fois, j'ai l'impression qu'il comprend tout ce que je lui dis.
Okay, so that's it. Okay, in this text there was much text. There is much more text in French. I'm sorry. Okay, the important part here was that everything just is displayed in the dark. Okay, it seems to be like a comic scene, and then it changes and they come out of the pyramid and they have like an ordinary scene. So what can you tell me about it? Is it difficult to identify speakers? Speaker identification would be easier, okay, because here we have seen all those characters before, so we know who they are, and we may even know their location on screen because they are carrying like their lights, okay, and then everything goes off, okay, so we know where they were, so we can even imagine. Yeah, the only newcomer there is the dog. The dog was not supposed to be on a screen, and then suddenly Obrik says, don't you agree? And then the dog just says, yeah. So that's the only moment when someone who's not supposed to be there appears on a screen. But on the one hand, we have part of the information that is present. We have the eyes. The eyes are quite expressive. So one of the risks we have when we are subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing is to make it like extremely expressive and over-representative, okay? So we try to, we abuse of descriptions, and we sometimes introduce much more descriptions or many more descriptions than necessary. So here, would you really need to describe how things are, how people are speaking, what their mood is? Do you think it would be necessary here?
Well, with the eyes, we have some information, no? With the movement of the eyes, no?
Yes. That's it. We have quite important information. Maybe you should introduce the information of the tiny friend that appears, okay? So know that it is there, because that was not supposed to be inside the pyramid. Even though his eyes are there, we may have to explain, okay? But then, okay, there is something going on. Okay, the eyes are quite representative, and there is a chase. Yeah?
Yeah.
And what happens with that chase? And again, the music.
And now is when you're going to discover that I am the oldest one in the group, because I recognize the sound.
Ah, okay, you're an oldie also.
No, I am the oldest.
So what happens there? For the ones, how many of you didn't know what that, or don't know what that music refers to? Benny Hill. Ah, yes.
Benny Hill, yeah.
Benny Hill show.
Okay.
I think there may be people who don't know what Benny Hill are. So for those of you who don't know what Benny Hill are, how would you describe this music? What does this music just infer? Okay, what does this music just give you as information?
Well, I know what it is, but I'm not going to
Lucky
say
Luke.
it.
Someone says Lucky Luke, okay? Lucky Luke.
Oh, something happened? Oh, okay.
Okay, none of you. You don't want to just...
Well, I can tell you is what Benny Hill was chasing his friend, that it was the short one, no? And he was
I've got an example. It was a TV show which was politically incorrect, all of it. Okay, that you can think of all politically incorrect things these days. They were all combined in this show. Okay,
yeah.
And there was always a chase. Okay, and there were normally like naked women running around and just men chasing them. Okay, so I tried to find the one which was not that politically incorrect. Okay, so that at least you could get a hint of what those chases were and how there is some sort of relationship between what goes on in the pyramid and what happens afterwards. Yeah, so I'm showing you. Okay, I'm sharing again so that you can see it. Okay, so that was it. Okay, there was a chase, and there is supposed to be some sort of race or chase inside the pyramid. Okay, and that's what they're trying to compare. Again, as it happens before, they are trying to compare what's going on with some cultural references that are valid in a given moment in time. Okay, if we try to subtitle this for a given audience, and the cultural background of our audience does not recognize this cultural reference, that wouldn't make sense to refer to Benny Hill, okay? Because we would get our reader or viewer in this case lost, okay, in the processing, yeah? So we would have to find something neutral in order to convey the information, okay, in order to somehow introduce that humor that is present with that chase, yeah? So just by saying a Russian music, would you convey that meaning?
No, I don't think so.
I think that part of the information would be missing. I don't know how familiar you are with processing subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing. And one of the most controversial issues in subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing is to convey music and to verbalize how music is. For many years, in many cases, subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, they included examples of music. The single tag that was included there read music. And that could be, I don't know, beat music, that could be acid music, that could be classical music, and all that a deaf viewer would have would be music. Yeah, that's important to know there is music, but we need some extra info, okay? Because music can convey a lot. It may have up to different to 20 different meanings, okay? A given music in a film, okay? So it's very poor to just say music.
There's some suggestion in the forum. Sorry, Angela. Yeah.
No, I was thinking like saying chasing music is like saying climbing music. I mean, it's nothing. Or saying painting music. I mean, including a verb with music is not defining, you know, the kind of music, no? For example, I think somebody says something about funny and rapidly paced orchestra or something like that, no? But you're defining maybe the type of music. But saying chasing music is like saying ice skating music. I mean, I cannot identify what kind of music is that.
Can you figure out there is some sort of chase just by the eyes and what's going on?
Of course.
So that would be redundant information. You wouldn't need that bit of information. Okay, so right. that part of the info that is already present in this case on scene is not necessary. Okay, we would have to go for something that makes us understand. Saying funny music could be funny. I don't know how familiar you are with audio description, but this is a tiny bit of the same. You have to verbalize things that do not exist as verbal elements. Okay, so in this case, we have to look for the less subjective description, okay, in order to convey that information. If we introduce like saying something like funny, we are already conditioning our reader, okay, saying that it is funny. Yeah. So maybe by introducing some neutral information that make the reader, viewer in this case, infer there is a funny element, make this viewer just figure out or build up the scene on its own, okay, on his or her own. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, I know it's in Spanish and I'm sorry, but I have no idea, no clue how to say that in English, but I'm thinking about chirigota.
Yeah, could be. Okay, like some sort of fanfare, but
it is not quite that, right? I don't know. I'm thinking about that, about the chirigota thing, which is this fanfare, but I'm not so sure.
The problem is that by introducing fanfare, you are introducing an extra element that does not exist as such.
Yeah.
Okay. So fanfare, for the ones who are not familiar with that, those fanfare is like those music groups traditional in the carnivals. Okay, maybe. So.
But is this kind of music that includes comedy, or include this fun and rapid music?
Mm-hmm. For me, the thing is that you would be building up a new image that is not on scene. Okay, it's like trying to some sort of, if it is translation, it's some sort of compensation. You are building information on the one hand, you are introducing this information.
Right.
It's not like the best thing to do. I don't know whether I would make it better than this. Yeah. Okay. For me, it would be like some sort of translation defect in this case, because you have to make it brief. You have to describe it in the way of not introducing foreign elements. For me, a fanfare would be a foreign element in this case. Okay. But it would be like a tricky element to describe. This film, for those, I think there were French people in the group. If you ever have the possibility of having access to the subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing in this film, they are exceptional. Okay, as I told you, in the French color coding includes green color to introduce bits of text that are pronounced in a foreign language. Okay, here, whenever any of the speakers is speaking a foreign language, they introduce hieroglyphs. Okay, and they are displayed as hieroglyphs on the subtitle. You cannot read absolutely anything, but it matches perfectly the comic scene of the rest of the movie. So here it is great, and the music as such is compensated somehow with this. The problem is that it's compensated, but it's partially compensated. It was subtitled back then, 2002, I think it was. So they referred to the Benny Hill show. So that way they don't have the problem of conveying that information, just dropping Benny Hill reference, which is essential in this case. Yeah. Yes, Angel, it's like in comics. They have adapted absolutely everything, and something that is useless, or that is not useless, but is not traditionally used in Spanish subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, especially, is that they don't use onomatopoeia. Okay, they are not normally used, and in this case they are used. Okay, because they think that they combine, they match perfectly. Okay, the nature of the film itself. Okay. Yeah, sure, it is. The problem is that what happens with deaf audiences, whenever they get some information or something they are not familiar with, they absolutely need to know what it is. So that implies they are going to interrupt their viewing process to ask their companion what that means. Okay, and whenever they are going to go back to viewing the film, they might have skipped a couple or three subtitles. Okay, so but there's something, yes, that's like providing that extra info, and definitely they are going to look for that info later on. I think that's how it should be done. Okay, it's like sometimes when introducing information, for example, their classical music, and they introduce the theme on the author, for example, or the musician, and sometimes someone may say, okay, but okay, if the general audience may not know who that author was, or okay, that's not my problem. Okay, they should know. I just provide the name so that they should know what this is. And sometimes we think that deaf people do not have that music culture, and they do. Okay, so we don't have to get them rid of that pleasure. Okay, so we provide that information they can also enjoy. Yeah. Okay, and I think that's almost all for me. I had another example, but it's a bit longer, and it was like 2 minutes long. So.
Wow, it was.
I don't know whether it was a bit tiring or a bit like basic, because you're just pros in subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing or visual accessibility. But I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm sure that people did.
Yes, it was great. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I am curious about what happened to the scene of Benny Hill. Did you what it was included at the very end?
They included the Benny Hill show, Benny Hill theme.
Okay.
Benny Hill show theme. They included it, but I said this was subtitled back then, 2002. If these subtitles were updated today, I'm not sure they would have included the same reference as they wouldn't have included with Royal Canon either. Okay. On the one hand, I'm not sure the translator could have, in many cases, could have identified the reference him herself. Okay, because in many cases, as Mi Arma we've seen lately, okay, there are some references which are not evident. Okay.
I think Imran had a question in the forum, Vero.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe simply football.
Yeah. Just because they cannot hear, we must not think they don't have that music culture. I don't know. I know deaf people, and there are many deaf people who go to concerts, and they are the ones just in front of the loudspeaker, maybe touching the loudspeaker and getting the beat. Okay, so they have that access, and they have that relationship with music also. And here, even if they did the Benny Hill show, the problem with it was that it was a very visual. There were no dialogues in most cases. There were some texts from time to time. So that everything that was going on was like this chase, okay, and they were like different scenes as the one we've seen. So they were quite visual, and they were quite accessible to deaf audiences. So even if they don't know the music, they know, okay, what's going on, because there was always a chase. So they may not what we're referring to. Okay.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think we should leave it here.
Okay, thank you very much.
A pleasure.
COST, European Cooperation in Science and Technology. This video is based upon work from Cost Action Lead Me CA 19142, supported by COST. COST is a funding agency for research and innovation networks. Our actions help connect research initiatives across Europe and enable scientists to grow their ideas by sharing them with their peers. This boosts their research, career and innovation. www.cost.eu. This work is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution CC BY, funded by the Horizon 2020 Framework Programme of the European Union.